Amidst the Everglades swamps, where sword grass intertwines with cypress roots, a 5-meter-long Burmese python slithers in search of prey. Soon, it will find its prey, attack it, and dine. But all the while, a completely different hunt will be underway within the python. Another hunter moves alongside him through the undergrowth. And no matter what the python does, this hunter will win, and having won, will escape from his body. A rich inner world. Here's a quick reminder below, in case you forget. So, while the python slithers through the Everglades, it's time to take a look inside and see another hunter. The worm-like creature has settled into the snake's lungs and is slowly draining its life, feeding on its blood for its own survival. This parasitic crustacean, known as a pentastodon or tongue worm, lays eggs directly inside the python's body and then grows, causing colossal damage to its host. To make things more interesting, let's look at this stage through the lens of games. Imagine you're looking at a strange mob. A pale, bean sprout-like parasite up to 7.5 centimeters long. Sometimes it acts on its own. In rare events, this parasite emerges through the snake's mouth, emerging from its lungs after the host's death. Now let's look at the mechanics. Its life cycle is a whole chain of quests. The initial stage, eggs are released from the gastrointestinal tract of an infected snake. The next participant in this chain is an insect, which picks up this drop and becomes a temporary host. Then comes the upgrade. The infected insect is eaten by an amphibian or reptile and is now just an intermediate resource. The final boss is a new snake, which swallows the infected prey. At this point, the 5-mouthed creature re-enters the game, but on a new board, inside a fresh host, where it grows and develops peacefully. Scientists claim that dozens or even hundreds of these parasites can be found in the lungs of snakes. One documented case was of 107 adult snakes being counted in the respiratory system of a black snake during an autopsy. And the consequences of such proximity for the body are obvious. If a huge worm has taken up residence in the lungs, breathing becomes difficult, strength diminishes, and the snake is ultimately doomed. But the problem isn't the parasite's existence, but its invasive nature. Just like its original hosts, invasive Burman pythons, rapidly expanding across Florida ecosystems, carry a pentacle, which also colonizes new territories and hosts. Scientists first discovered an infestation of a native snake with this creature back in 2012. Tracing the source, they concluded the disease originated in Asia with Burmese pythons, which were introduced to Florida in the mid-1990s. Since then, Raleigh-Geishla orientalis has entered the respiratory system of at least 19 of the 46 native snake species, from striped grass snakes to black racers. Some researchers have noted a significant decline in the population of pygmy rattlesnakes in the Everglades. The spread of the parasite may be the cause. Incidentally, all cases of infection were recorded in the south of the state, precisely where pythons had already established a strong presence. No infections were found outside their natural habitat. Coincidence? Of course not. And here's another important point. Burmese pythons are naturally large and can carry lung parasites for long periods of time and remain alive. Moreover, they evolved alongside the pentacle snakes, so they tolerate the infection more easily. However, local small snakes are much more vulnerable. They lack the defense mechanisms developed over thousands of years. Their respiratory system is smaller, so it's easily disrupted by a pentasto. Inflammation, infections, loss of the ability to breathe. Normally none of this ever ends well. In some snakes, adult parasites grow to almost 10 centimeters, feeding on the host's blood and causing pneumonia or even sepsis. Weakened reptiles stop hunting and often die of starvation. The threat only mounts. The parasite is protected from the cold by its host's body and is therefore able to survive the frost. And the green, swampy expanses of Florida offer it an abundance of intermediate hosts. This means it can quickly move further and further, finding more victims. The problem of parasites in snakes may be far more serious than it first appears. Scientists admit that only half of the known snake species in the United States and Canada have ever been tested for parasites. What happens to the rest? No one really knows. The main difficulty is that snakes are masters of camouflage. Finding them in the wild, monitoring their lives, and even more so understanding how parasites affect their behavior or health is nearly impossible. There are methods for tracking individual snakes using implanted transmitters, but this is grueling and expensive work. And while snakes hide from view, we tend to underestimate the severity of what's happening. This means the scale of the threat may be much greater than we currently realize. But should anything be done about it? Theoretically, some infected snakes could be saved if they were caught and treated. But in reality, this is unrealistic, as it would require treating not only the snakes, but also all the intermediate hosts: frogs, lizards, and cockroaches. Still, scientists find reasons for cautious hope. Research shows that while the populations of some species are declining, the Florida cottonmouth, despite severe infestations, continues to hold its own. Its immune system appears to be better able to combat the parasite. This suggests that some local snakes will still be able to mitigate the effects of the infection and find a way to coexist with the new parasite. Perhaps the snakes will even evolve to resist it. In fact, pentagrams are truly impressive. They don't just live inside the snake, they can even survive after the host's death, albeit for a short time. Most other parasites, such as trematodes, end their life with the host. These worms, which live in a snake's mouth, are easy to spot if you gently force the snake to open its mouth. The tiny parasites will be lodged on the roof of the mouth, and along the sides, they can even be carefully removed with tweezers. But once the snake dies, the parasites are also finished. Trematodes can also travel the world. The American snail Phacella acuta likely introduced the Trematodacetosoma elongatum to Japan, where it began infecting local snakes. Typically, such parasites undergo a complex life cycle through snails and possibly frogs before infecting snakes. But even so, their fate is tightly tied to the life of their owner. The death of the snake is almost always fatal for them. The five-mouthed snakes, however, deviate from this rule. They can easily crawl out of the lungs, even when the snake is already dead, and reach the mouth. In the world of parasites, this makes them truly cool and unusual. Survival after the death of the host is extremely rare. Okay, so there are known cases. As an example, scientists cite the Russell's viper, one of the most dangerous snakes in Asia. It's feared for its irritability, lightning-fast strikes, and hematotoxic venom that destroys tissue and blood. But within this formidable predator, a completely different enemy may lurk: nematodes of the genus Caliciphilus. These thin worms inhabit the stomachs and intestines of snakes and lizards. Typically, their presence only causes enteritis and associated infections, but sometimes the consequences can be fatal. The most curious thing happens after the snake's death. Researchers once dissected the body of a viper killed with a Chlorotin solution and discovered a live tangle of parasites inside. The nematodes weren't at all bothered by the fact that their owner was dead. Scientists preserved them for further study. Sometimes, it seems, dead snakes can reveal truly incredible surprises. A Reddit user spotted a decomposing snake on a wooden stand. When they removed it and attempted to move it, 24 writhing creatures up to 25 millimeters long burst forth from within. They resembled larvae, but appeared much larger. No one in the comments could really explain what it was. But we have a theory. It's a housefly, a synanthropic species that follows humans everywhere. It's commonly known as a disease carrier, but under certain conditions, it behaves quite differently. Females can lay eggs in moist, decaying tissue, including animal wounds. This causes myiasis, an infection caused by the dipteran larvae, which begin feeding on dead or even living tissue. In 2010, a 70-centimeter Persian viper with an infected wound was brought into an entomology lab. Upon examination, it was discovered that fly larvae had already penetrated the tissue. Even after all the larvae were removed from the snake's body, they were not immediately destroyed. Some of the material was left for observation. It was important for the scientists to track the developmental cycle. 10 larvae were found to be quite alive and active. 4 pupae were found nearby. They were placed in separate containers, creating conditions close to natural ones. The process was completed within 3 days. Adult flies hatched from the pupae, fully confirming the scientists' correct species identification. The snake itself was extremely weakened by this time. Even before the infection, it had shown lethargy and loss of appetite. And this is precisely what made her especially vulnerable. The damaged tissue gradually began to rot. Moisture accumulated around the wound. This was enough to attract the female fly. She laid her eggs directly into the soft, decaying areas. The larvae, hatched in this environment, quickly burrowed into the wound and began feeding on the tissue. It's important to understand that adult flies are not parasites in the traditional sense. However, under favorable conditions, they easily transform an animal into a living incubator for their larvae. In fact, considering that after 3 days, the larvae had already transformed into adult flies, this means they were almost at the final stage of development when discovered. For a snake of its size, a dozen voracious larvae was too much to bear. They literally ate it from the inside out. So, the snake was lucky it was found and treated in time. Without human intervention, she would likely have perished. Scientists note that such cases are extremely rare, although they certainly occur frequently. It's just that no one usually sees or records them. If the snake had died at that moment, the process would have only accelerated for the larvae. The deader and more disgusting, the better for them. Then the larvae would have simply completed their cycle and left the snake's remains as flies. As for the Reddit incident, it's not certain that it was a common housefly. There are plenty of species in Australia that behave similarly. Incidentally, some commenters speculated that the snake died accidentally, getting stuck while molting. Then a fly arrived, laid eggs in the corpse, and soon larvae emerged. Further development is obvious. They feed on the tissue, pupate, and after a few days emerge as adult flies. Only human intervention prevented this. Ants are true cleaners in the world of decomposition. They can appear on a snake's corpse immediately after death and remain throughout all stages of decomposition, even after the fly larvae have left the body. Their feeding leaves characteristic marks on the skin. Instead of the usual holes or punctures, uneven areas with wavy or jagged edges appear. Sometimes these appear as sinuous lines or small jagged cutouts scattered across the skin's surface. At first glance, such damage might be easily mistaken for abrasions from life or traces of chemical exposure. But in reality, it's the result of ant activity after the snake's death. Invasive species, such as the red fire ant Solenopsis invicta, are particularly active. These insects are truly aggressive toward any other carcass invaders. They prevent flies from laying eggs, remove the larvae, or destroy them at all stages of development. Ants are capable of feeding on virtually the entire mass of a carcass, accelerating the decomposition process while simultaneously protecting the carcass from colonization by other insects. In general, ants don't share food. So if ants gather on a snake's corpse, it's a kind of living cleansing that can destroy any remaining parasites and prevent them from completing their life cycle. In this sense, the ants are true post-mortem guards, ready to fight anyone who tries to use the snake's body. In one case, a Chelamyrmex andicola army ant was feeding on a snake carcass. Although ants usually arrive at a dead animal, in this case, it's highly likely that these ants killed the snake. The claw-like jaws of worker ants, armed with long, barbed teeth, make Chelamyrmex andicola particularly formidable predators. These likely help the ants maintain a firm grip on their prey's skin during an attack. The bites of these ants are particularly painful and itchy, comparable to those of fire ants in the United States. Scientists have observed that the venom they inject is toxic and possibly paralytic. Based on observations, researchers believe that Chelamyrmex andicola is the only known species of army ant in the New World that eats vertebrate flesh. If these ants encounter a snake carrying any of the parasites described above, the parasites will die along with the host. The ants will also eat them as part of a general purge because, well, why let good things go to waste? This incident occurred on the Greek island of Corfu and surprised even scientists because another snake emerged from one. And no, it wasn't a live birth. According to published photos, a small wild reptile, an olive-striped striped merganser, survived being swallowed by a four-striped striped merganser. It all happened in 2011. A four-striped striped snake was killed by a domestic cat, and the cat's owner, a Dutch citizen, captured the incident on camera. Not right away, of course. First, his wife noticed the dead snake seemed to be moving. The man was convinced it was just a fantasy until he realized the snake really wasn't dead. Well, not completely, anyway. Returning from the cell, he saw the head of a small snake emerging from the ground. Eventually, the olive stripe broke free and crawled back into the wild, apparently unharmed. Only his pride was damaged. In 2017, a man named Christopher Reynolds captured a terrifying video of one snake berating another. That other snake is alive. Reynolds can be heard exclaiming in the video, "This is a super, ultra lucky day for that snake. I can't believe that little one is still alive. He couldn't breathe. That guy was covered in stomach acid and everything." Wildlife biologist David Stain, who studies amphibians and reptiles at Alabama Tech, commented on the incident. He explained that the larger snake in the video was frightened. It was frightened because it had eaten too much, not because it hadn't been on a diet. The problem is that snakes have difficulty moving quickly after a large meal, and if they feel threatened at that moment, they have to react. This is where a common defense mechanism, regurgitation, comes into play. Although there are snake species that specialize in eating other reptiles, such behavior remains rare. However, the video shows that even after being devoured by another snake, only a very lucky victim can survive and escape. Another interesting fact, even dead snakes can produce eggs, which will later hatch into live young. Roadkill snakes, or those killed for other reasons, often include pregnant snakes carrying eggs, and extracting them requires a careful and methodical approach. This is often unsuccessful. The conditions must be almost perfect. First, the snake had to have died just as it was about to lay its eggs, meaning they would already be as ready as possible for independent life. Second, the eggs must be within a very short window of external viability. Live eggs usually swell slightly and retain their shape and elasticity. If they deflate or become soft, this is a sure sign that development inside is disrupted. Sometimes eggs remain clean and intact in appearance, but over time they begin to show signs of decay. Most often, this is because they have not reached full maturity and were too early to leave the mother's body. Incidentally, the eggs are usually squeezed out manually, slowly and carefully, applying minimal force, and then wait for them to emerge from the cloaca on their own. Cutting the eggs exposes them to blood and intestinal contents, significantly reducing the chances of successful hatching. Washing the eggs, unless absolutely necessary, is also undesirable, as it can remove the natural protective substances that partially prevent the growth of bacteria and fungi. Even if all conditions are met, hatching remains a rare and difficult process. It's a stroke of luck if the eggs swell after removal rather than deflating. Experts say this gives hope for the survival and further development of the offspring. In rare cases, when all the conditions are met, egg maturity, minimal damage during removal, and the preservation of natural protective properties, young snakes actually hatch from dead snakes. This is extremely rare. Usually, the process is fruitless, but occasionally, young snakes do hatch, demonstrating that even after the death of the mother, life can find a way to continue. Oh, and while we're on the subject of interesting facts, here's another one. Snakes can also be victims of ticks. In 2019, snake catchers in Australia rescued a diamondback python that was literally covered in hundreds of ticks. A reptile, presumably sick and weakened by parasites, was lying in a backyard pool on Queensland's Gold Coast. A professional was called in to retrieve the snake and take it to a wildlife clinic for treatment. Veterinarians removed over 500 ticks, and according to the expert, the snake attempted to drown the parasite in the water. Apparently, it wasn't successful. His entire face was swollen, and he was completely overwhelmed by the ticks that had multiplied on him, the specialist noted. Handling snakes with ticks was like holding a bag of marbles that kept bouncing around under your hands. It sounds unpleasant. In the wild, snakes often pick up a small number of ticks and other parasites. But such a massive infestation suggests the animal likely had some underlying disease, perhaps caused by heat stress or drought. The animal was obviously seriously ill, since its natural defenses were so compromised. I doubt it would have survived if it hadn't been treated, the veterinarian said. It was later discovered that Nike, as the snake was named, had an infection, but it's unclear whether it developed before the ticks or because of them. I've never seen anything like this in 26 years of practice. It's the worst thing I've ever seen, one of the doctors admitted. The veterinarians also noted that not only female ticks, but also male ones had attached themselves to the Nike. The males likely stayed on the snake for months, barely eating, simply waiting for females. For the males, the snake isn't a dining hall, but rather a nightclub where they can meet their queen. Once the female has had her fill, she releases a pheromone that signals her readiness to mate. After this, the males separate from the host and begin to reproduce. The females then drop off to lay eggs, but the males remain. They can remain attached to the snake for as long as the snake itself is alive, and only then fall off due to old age. After the ordeal, Nike the python was diagnosed with anemia, severe deficiency of red blood cells caused by the tick sucking too much blood. This case demonstrates that parasites can literally weaken a python to the point of death. And he's not the only one. In the spring of 2024, a python was found in the Florida Everglades with no eyes. Ticks were parasitizing its eye sockets, likely causing its vision loss. The result is clear. Ticks interfere with snakes' lives. They suck blood, sapping energy, weaken the immune system, and impair hunting and vision. If there are too many of them, they can push a python to a state where it can't survive. Each individual, each tick, is a potential threat. Together, they can undermine the reptile's health from all sides. Now imagine that in addition to ticks, snakes are also plagued by other parasites, of which, as you've already realized, snakes have plenty. Or better yet, you can't imagine. But don't forget about the likes. See you soon.